Hello everyone and welcome to the Joy of Serging. I'm Pam Mahshie. I'm the Overlock Business Manager for BERNINA of America.
Hi everyone, I'm Gail Yellen, owner of Gail Patrice Design.
Well, if you're a quilter and wondering what could you possibly need an overlock for, you're about to find out. Today we're going to be talking with Jaime David. She's an expert maker who took on the ultimate quilt project, and I know we can't wait to see that, right Gail?
When I ever heard the dimensions of this quilt, I was totally blown away, so I can't wait to hear the story behind it.
Of course. Now, Jaime herself is a self-taught quilter, putting her background in interior architecture and fine arts to good use. Over the years, Jaime has certainly developed a lot of information for BERNINA of America, including many of the user guides, all the different types of projects and videos that you see, many of them on BERNINA.com and We All Sew. Jaime has also been very integral in the development of the L8 BERNINA Sergers that we're going to be sharing with you today as well. So we can't wait to see what Jaime is going to share with us.
I can't wait to hear about Jaime's evolution in the world of quilting and serging all together. So I'm on tenterhooks waiting.
Well, stay tuned and we'll be right back.
You're more than a maker. You're an artist, a creator, a dreamer. So you need something that's more than just a machine. BERNINA. A community of sewists and educators provide resources that allow you to create whenever inspiration strikes. More quality and Swiss precision enables a lifetime of artistry. Because when you truly want to see more of what's possible, nothing less will do. BERNINA, made to create.
So welcome, Jaime. We are so excited to hear all about your quilt, how you developed it, and kind of the reason for why you had put it together and how the serger and overlock was so integral in the development of that.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with two of my favorite serging people. Gail is my first serger teacher, so I'm really excited to be talking to both of you because I'd say Gail is the person that got me out of just using the standard overlock. But that is the stitch that I use to make the quilt assembly. Mm-hmm. So do you want me to start talking about the quilt?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that quilt. Sure. And actually the dress that we have behind you also is kind of a take on that quilt. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Probably much easier to transport because of the size of that quilt.
Yeah, that quilt would, fill this room, and it's very large. So the premise of the quilt, so just to kind of give the background, I guess, I have a Master's of Fine Art in textiles. And so in fine art, you're, an art program, right? So it's like, and I'm trained before that, my undergraduate degree is in interior architecture. So it's like, I've always considered myself an analytical creative, right? So it's like, I have a left brain and a right brain, which I use
together
in a pretty balanced way. Mm-hmm. But it's like, but I've always wanted a career that's creative, right? Like that's very important to me. And so it's like, so I always find myself on these paths that are trying to explore both sides. Mm-hmm. And so when I did my Master's of Fine Art, it's like, I really came to sewing as a quilter, which is kind of a backwards story from a lot of people. Like sewing almost missed me entirely. But it's like I picked up sewing in my 20s after I was married. I needed to make some curtains. That was my first project. And then I went from curtains to quilting. And so it's like, so when I was doing my fine art program, it's like a lot of the things that I was exploring in that program were related to the quilt. And quilt is a quilt art. There's a lot of controversy with this. If you read any theory, or if you just read common forms about quilting and art, it's like you're going to get down that path. So for my thesis, I wanted to basically reference the idea of painting and do color field painting. So the idea of Rothko paintings that are these massive, just immersive color stories. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of that thinking behind wanting to make this quilt to fill the gallery wall. So I went to the University of Kansas, and we had a gallery that our thesis is were put into. And usually it was 2 grad students at a time. So there was kind of 2 sections of the gallery. And I picked the section of the gallery that had this big, long wall. And I just wanted to fill it with color. And a quilt on a wall as more of a painting or a color experience, right? So it's like, so I'm playing with a few ideas there in terms of what is a quilt, what is art, how does color work? And I got to reading a lot. I mean, you can't really do any color in art without knowing a little bit about Joseph Albers. So, you know, there's the Interaction of Color book that he writes, and it's the idea of one color next to a color and how those colors affect each other in our perception, right? Like the way you see the color red is different than the way I see the color red, but when the color red is surrounded by yellow, it takes on a different
feel and
look. Almost different experience. And so, you know, this is complex to think about. And I really wanted to just get making, because that's the other side, right? Like, yes, I'm creative, but also it's like this impulse to make and be the maker, and textiles really works for me that way because it's like your hands are in it, you're connected to it in those ways. And so I wanted to kind of explore these ideas and dive into this thing with color, but it's like, how did I want to use color? And, you know, how deep into that did I want to go? But it's like these ideas that Joseph Albers was presenting in Interaction of color related to the other, was interesting to me. And also at the time I was reading a little bit about generative design. So there was a thing happening a little bit in the quilt world at that time where people were using computers to generate patterns and design. And so I just decided that's it, right? Like, I'm going to use an outside source to inform the color, because I want this color experience. And it's like, I want to explore that idea of just what happens when you just are given the set of parameters. So I'm not a computer whiz. I don't do any programming. I use computers and that's fine. It's like my relationship with them is not intimate and I like it that way. But it's like, I know a lot of smart people.
We all use our computers in ways that we know what we want the end result to be, but we have others that help us to get to that end result.
Totally. And then we put a computer on these machines, right? So
and I can kind of see now when you're talking about the scale of this quilt too, with how the intersection with architecture too, where you're building something in a room probably with hard products, but on that scale you're doing it with soft fabric products. So now that makes sense.
And that's, that whole foundational part of creation is so important to a quilter or someone who makes garments. That foundation is what helps us build on to the next level. Yeah, great. Okay, well, we're just going to take a little break and we'll be right back.
My first big day for sewing was I just had enough with taking my jeans to the tailor. So I bought a sewing machine. I had no idea how to use it. A friend of mine said, "Oh, I'm taking a quilting class." Like, all right, I'll come with you. I'll learn how to use the machine. And now I've been quilting for 7 years.
So Jaime, we've been talking about the dimensions of this quilt, and I am sure everybody is waiting to hear, how big exactly is it?
Okay, so I was working with that gallery wall and I knew that I wanted to use it, in terms of filling it. So that's what dictated the size, but it's 10 feet tall and it's basically, I think it was about 46 and a half feet long.
That's amazing.
All one piece.
Wow.
That is amazing. So you used the Kona cottons you mentioned, or we've been talking about that. So you use that for all of your color combinations. Now, how did you actually sew that together then? Yeah,
so the system was my computer algorithm that my friend made, spit out the color sequences, and then I just built those in basically width of fabric. So every piece of the quilt was width of fabric is about 42 inches. And so I made those 10-foot long sections 42 inches wide. of the generated color stripes from the computer algorithm. Then I took those and composed with those sections that whole 46.5-foot wide quilt. So when I went to actually, like, the quilting in terms of those sections was pretty standard quilting on a sewing machine and just simple, like, edge along the edge quilting. But I needed to assemble it, and I wanted it to reference, and it was important to me to be one piece. And so I was like, how am I going to put this together? This is structure. This is the architecture, right?
And the weight,
That's what I was just thinking about.
on those seams.
Strength.
I had to think about that part of it, you know, at the beginning too, like, how am I going to put this together? And I use a serger in a very utilitarian way, especially back then. Not so much now. I could do a lot of things thanks to Gail's classes and my experience with BERNINA and all of this. But it's like back then I was like, the overlock stitch, man, that is a strong seam. And so that's what I wanted. I wanted something to make those edges seamed together in a strong way. And it's like, so I took the two, well, I mean, I cut some of those quilts apart and composed the overall composition, but I took my strip sets and I serged the two quilted sections together. So you've got fabric batting fabric and then another fabric batting fabric. And then I also didn't want it to be ugly on the back. So of course, you know, I had thought about how I'm going to finish that off. So I put a little binding edge on it. So I did basically I think they call it like a knife edge finish with the binding. So there's no binding on it traditionally. It all rolls to the back. And it's like all the seams were also like another layer of just a little binding that would fold over that serged seam. So if you look at the back of the quilt, there's a beautiful structure to it. And you can kind of see the way that it was assembled. You don't see the serging stitch, sorry, but it's like...
But it's there for the durability of the quilt and the longevity of the quilt itself.
And I'm guessing that you probably used a 4-thread overlock?
Gosh, I'm sure that I did.
And did you change colors continuously or just?
Just gray, you know, because I just needed something to blend with all the different colors that were on the front. And so it's like, you don't really see any of the seams. It really was a nice, sturdy finish. But it was big, and I had to kind of just like Legos, right? Like it just got bigger. So it was like, okay, 2 sections together, 2 sections together, 2 sections together. And then it was like, those 2 sections go to these 2 sections together. And it's like, you know, I kind of got it down to where it was a third of the quilt. And so I had the last 2 seams that were really heavy. And I was doing this in my tiny little house, but I had my dining room table's kind of big, and it has 2 leaves that I could put in it.
I was just wondering about the size of the table you were working on.
My serger, so it was my first serger was the BERNINA 700, so it's a tiny little serger, but it's a mighty serger, right? So it's at the very corner of this table, and I'm using the whole table and my husband, and I'm serging, and he's helping me like stabilize it, especially at the end. And I was like, this might be the only time that I break a BERNINA, you know? Like, I was like, this is really putting a lot to it, right? It's a lot of layers, it's a long seam, it's a very heavy, it's a very unusual thing to do. But that BERNINA held up, of course.
Well, sure, I'm sure it did.
Yeah.
This is so interesting, and this is answering all the questions that I've been wondering about with this scale of a project. But we'll be right back to learn a little bit more from Jaime.
My first big day was when my mom taught me how to sew. It did something to me, like being able to create something with your hands and understand the machinery. I got the bug.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. This has just been so fascinating, learning about quilting and weight of stitches. But so, Jaime, you mentioned that you had worked on a BERNINA 700. So you've been working with the BERNINA machines for a long period of time, and you were also very integral in the development of the L8 series machines. So were there any features that you may have in working with that 700 possibly brought into the L8 series machines because of that experience?
Yeah, I think, you know, when you sew and you go from a sewing machine to a serger, like you're intimidated to change things, but a serger is, you guys know, a serger is about changing tension and it's about changing things about the stitch to create a different stitch, right? And it's like, so you can influence things that can impact your strength. You can tighten the needle tensions, you can make the stitch wider. And it's like, so knowing that about sergers and then thinking about the development when we were working with these machines, it's like, you know, being able to see that in a different way on the touch screen and like have that total stitch control that you have with a serger, but just in a really visual way here and an intuitive like user way, I think is really important to make it feel more comfortable, right? To break down that barrier of like, you never change the tension, right? Because no, you do. You change it all the time.
All the time. And it gives you that ability to affect the stitches based on the way you want them to look and the kind of fabrics that you're working with.
And what you want them to do as far as strength.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
You're probably creating a mental wish list as you were doing that quilt long ago, that
Sure.
thinking, I wish I had this, 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 and this, and now you do.
Well, maybe not at the time, but right, like knowing and having
That
those kind of
experience.
weird experiences
Yes.
with serger beyond just finishing seams for a garment, you know, and stuff like that that's sort of standard. It's like there's a lot of comfort features here, right? You think about the development of this, that's a lot of what we talk about at Bernina, you know, and then just beyond that, like that idea of getting creative with stitches. And, you know, one of the trainings that I did for Bernina was called signature stitches, because it's like, what is a flat lock? Really, it's just a overlock stitch with loose tension.
Right.
Right? But we call it a different thing. But it's like, if you get into the mindset of, yes, you can be analytical. Yes, you can be creative. You can make kind of your own stitches here.
And it just like you have on your scarf here also, is that you're able to interpret those stitches in different ways. And we've talked in other episodes too, they'll be seeing different ways of using those threads and how the threads affect the end result and the look of those stitches. So it's not that you have to be afraid of using or touching. I always use the illustration that these stitches are, or the tension, you know, we use that, the T word, I always call it, and everybody gets tense. But if we use them and call them thread control, dials, knobs, what have you, it makes it much more approachable and helps that customer understand that they're controlling that thread and not you have the control over the thread, and it gives you that flexibility in the look of your stitch.
I think, you know, that's the really awesome thing about any sewing is the fact that there's always something to learn, there's always something new to try, there's always another teacher to take you to the next space. You know, it's like, and you know, like, it just hits all the marks, being, you know, a person that likes to understand how things work, that can appreciate a creative take on something standard. You know, I think sewing, serging, adding serging into quilts, there's a lot of limitless possibilities. Like my big quilt, it was utility, but it's like, you know, and strength of the seam. But it's like, but you can put those serger stitches and make beautiful quilts and show those stitches too, just like this, so.
And I always like to say to students, you know, all the rocket science was done by the people in the engineering department, and you were part of that to develop all of the creativity that is built into this machine. So it's fantastic.
It was fun to kind of come on at Bernina at the, I mean, I came on towards the end of the development of this machine, but there was still a lot of testing that I did. And there's still there's a few things in the the interface that I was able to influence in some of those conversations. So it's like kind of the ultimate dream job is, you know, to get to like play a part in influencing the development of a product in a way, and it's a creative product that we love to use. So
thank you, because it makes my job so much more fun.
Exactly. Well, we're going to take a little break and we'll be right back.
Nothing sparks a surge in creativity like the revolutionary L8 Series Serger machines, only from Bernina. With quick, automatic one-step air threading, all sewists can serge with the greatest of ease with Bernina, made to create.
So Jaime, are there any features of the machine that really help you? I know we get questions asked all the time about feet or accessories or items that might even come with the machine that would help in the development of accurate stitching or quilting or...
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a good question. There's so much with Bernina, like that's the thing.
Because we are the foot company, right?
Yeah, we get into the accessories and but I think one thing that is kind of a game changer for a serger is we have a seam guide that attaches right up here to the knife cover. And so it's like, so when you're doing piecing or like long seams, like actually I did serge the seams to make the dress. So if you look at the inside of that dress, it's all nice and tidy because I serged those strips together to make the fabric to make the dress. But if I had had a seam guide, I would have felt comfortable that I wasn't trimming off too much because I can set that exactly where I want it and know that I'm going to get like the accuracy that I would have with my sewing machine because I'm using those accessories that come with it.
And that's sometimes an area of fear that people have with a machine with an overlock because they think it's all, because it is. I mean, it cuts and it sews, and how am I going to keep everything nice and straight? And that seam guide comes with the machine, which is fantastic.
Well,
And they know the knife hits before the needles do.
Exactly. Yeah, because it is a different viewpoint or guiding point than what you're used to using on your sewing machine too.
And I love all the like the nuance, the Swissism of the machine, you know, like the knife cutter is on the outside of the machine. So if for some reason you didn't want to use the knife with the serger, you can shut it off without even opening it up, which is awesome. And I love this.
We haven't even opened this up in any of them because
our tools are here. Everything is perfectly in place. This is like, I mean, makes me happy.
That was done with me and mine because I was always forever losing my little screwdriver for the
to change your needles,
to
which you
change
do
the
all the
needles, but
time.
now I know where it is.
Well, good. Well, Jaime, it has just been an absolute pleasure to have you here to hear your story about your quilt, how you helped develop the machines that we have today, and the influence that you continue to have on the Bernina product. So we're so happy that you were able to join us today, and we encourage all of you to check out all of the other great content that Jaime is also responsible for on We All Sew and other Bernina products. Thank you so much for joining us on The Joy of Serging. Our next episode is Take a Walk on the Wild Side with Sylvain Bergeron. He is the foot expert, and we're going to be talking more about all the different feet and accessories that you can use on your Bernina Sergers. Thanks for joining us. Make every day a big day.
Happy sewing and serging.